Today I stand before you to speak on a subject that lies at the heart of the Muharram commemorations, the spiritual significance of Matam. Matam, the act of chest beating and mourning, is more than a ritual. It is a deep emotional expression of our love and loyalty towards Imam Hussain, as the grandson of Prophet Muhammad PBU, and a spiritual symbol of our connection to the tragedy of Karbala. When we perform Matam, we are not just expressing sorrow, we are reminding ourselves in the world of the principles of justice, sacrifice, and resistance against oppression that Imam Hussain stood for. Every beat of the chest echoes with the pain of the martyrs of Karbala. It is a spiritual act of remembrance, a physical way to internalize the suffering of the Ahlul Bayt and align our hearts with their struggle. The tears we shed and the pain we feel during Matam cleanse our souls. It's not just grief, it's purification. Imam Jafar Sadiq said, "A true believer weeps for Imam Hussain." This mourning is a way to build spiritual closeness with Allah. By mourning for his beloved servant, Matam unites the community. It's a collective spiritual experience. We gather, we mourn, and we strengthen each other's faith. It reminds us to stay steadfast in the face of injustice, just as the companions of Imam Hussain did, even when death was certain. Some may not understand why we beat our chests or cry loudly, but we know in our hearts that this is not a ritual of despair. It's a ritual of love, loyalty, and resistance. It is our way of keeping the message of Karbala alive, not in history books, but in our bodies, hearts, and spirit. Let us never forget, Matam is not just a mourning ceremony, it is a spiritual declaration. It says, "We are with Hussain, now and forever." Matam is a spiritual expression of love for Imam Hussain, and the martyrs of Karbala. It is not just a cultural custom or a physical act. It is a deep emotional and spiritual connection that binds the hearts of believers to the tragedy of Karbala. When we engage in Matam, we are not merely performing an outward ritual. We are expressing a profound inner grief for the sacrifice made by Imam Hussain, his family, and his loyal companions who gave their lives to uphold the principles of truth, justice, and Islam. The beating of the chest is symbolic. It is the heart crying out in sorrow for what happened on the plains of Karbala, where innocence was met with brutality and where divine values were upheld through ultimate sacrifice. This expression of love is rooted in the bond between the followers of Ahlul Bayt and the family of the Prophet PBU. Just as a child cries in pain when a parent is hurt, the believer weeps and performs Matam when remembering the pain endured by Imam Hussain. It is an act of devotion that transcends logic and enters the realm of the soul, where love, loyalty, and grief intermingle. The more we understand the pain of Karbala, the more intense our love becomes, and the more sincere our Matam grows. In that moment, Matam becomes an act of worship, a way to offer our hearts to the cause Imam Hussain, died for, and to spiritually align ourselves with his mission. Through Matam, we declare that our hearts still beat for Hussain, our souls still weep for his loss, and our bodies still feel the impact of his sacrifice. It is a form of spiritual resistance to forgetfulness and injustice, reminding us that love for Imam Hussain is not just a part of our identity, it is the core of our faith. It symbolizes our connection to the values of justice, sacrifice, and resistance. The tragedy of Karbala was not merely a historical event, it was a defining moment that demonstrated the true meaning of standing for what is right, no matter the cost. When we perform Matam, we are not simply mourning the physical loss of lives, we are reaffirming our commitment to the very principles for which Imam Hussain, gave everything. His stand was not for power or position, it was for the preservation of the moral and spiritual integrity of Islam. He refused to pledge allegiance to a corrupt and tyrannical ruler, knowing that his stance would lead to death, but also knowing that it would keep the soul of Islam alive. Every act of Matam, every tear and every drop of blood shed in remembrance becomes a declaration that we will not forget those values. Justice, the right of the oppressed, the dignity of the weak, and the voice of the voiceless. was central to Hussein's mission. His sacrifice reminds us that silence in the face of injustice is itself a form of betrayal. Through Matam, we align ourselves with this philosophy, reinforcing within ourselves a sense of duty to oppose oppression wherever it exists, whether in society, politics, or even within ourselves. Resistance, too, is at the heart of Karbala, and it lives on through the spirit of Matam. It teaches us that even when the world stands against you, truth is not determined by numbers, and righteousness is not measured by popularity. Imam Hussain resisted not only with his sword but with his principles. Matam becomes our way of inheriting that resistance, not with weapons, but with remembrance, with emotion, and with unwavering loyalty to the cause. It's a message passed down from generation to generation that the followers of Hussein will never bow to falsehood, and they will never forget the blood that was spilled for the sake of justice. Matam is not only emotional, but a form of spiritual purification. In the act of mourning for Imam Hussein the believer enters a sacred state where the heart opens itself fully to grief, love, and reflection. It is through this emotional release that the soul begins to cleanse itself of the impurities of the world, arrogance, selfishness, negligence, and spiritual laziness. Just as wudu purifies the body before prayer, Matam purifies the heart before deeper connection with Allah. The pain felt during Matam is not empty suffering, it is pain that awakens the conscience and forces the self to confront the values it has neglected. It brings the believer face to face with the reality of sacrifice, the harshness of oppression, and the depth of the injustice suffered by the family of the Prophet PBU. When one beats the chest not for show or culture, but from the depth of devotion and sorrow, it becomes a form of spiritual rebirth. The tears shed in remembrance of Karbala are not wasted. In fact, Islamic traditions tell us that these tears are precious in the eyes of Allah. Each tear becomes a silent dua, a quiet call for nearness to the Almighty through the love of His most beloved servants. When we cry for Hussein, we are in reality crying for the loss of values in our own society, for the distance we sometimes feel from God, and for the injustice that still surrounds us today. Matam forces us to pause from our daily lives and reevaluate our priority. In the moment of mourning, worldly distractions fade away, and the heart becomes focused on something eternal. The remembrance of Hussein strips away material desires and turns the attention inward towards spiritual truth. This is why so many find peace in Matam, not because they enjoy suffering, but because they feel the burden of sin being lifted as they engage in sincere lamentation. Through this process, the believer becomes spiritually lighter, more humble, more aware of their role in the world, and more connected to the higher purpose of life. It helps mourners internalize the pain and suffering of Ahlul Bayt. The tragedy of Karbala is not a distant historical narrative for those who participate in Matam. It becomes a lived emotional experience, one that penetrates deeply into the soul. Through the physical and emotional act of chest beating, crying, and reciting elegies, mourners do not simply remember what happened, they begin to feel what happened. The hunger of the children, the thirst of the camp, the silence of the night before Ashura, the bravery of the companions, and the loneliness of Imam Hussain on the battlefield. All these images come alive in the heart of a true mourner. This internalization is not done for drama or ritual, but for the purpose of deep spiritual alignment with the values and sacrifices of the Ahlul Bayt. When someone performs Matam with a sincere heart, they momentarily share in the sorrow of Lady Zainab, the courage of Imam Zainal Abidin, and the loyalty of Hazrat Abbas, It is through this profound emotional engagement that the tragedy of Karbala stops being a lesson on paper and becomes a personal reality. This connection pushes the mourner to reflect: would I have stood beside Hussein? Would I have stayed loyal? Am I following his path today? These are questions that arise not just intellectually, but emotionally, because the pain has been internalized. When that pain settles in the heart, It begins to shape the character. It softens arrogance, awakens empathy, and inspires courage. It builds within the mourner a moral compass centered around sacrifice, truth, and unwavering faith. This is why the tradition of Matam is so central to preserving the legacy of Karbala. It ensures that the message is not only remembered but felt, and when something is felt, it is less likely to be forgotten. The mourners of Hussein A.S. don't just learn history, they inherit the pain, and through that inheritance, they carry forward the mission of justice and truth. The act of Matam creates a deep emotional and spiritual bond with the message of Karbala. It transforms the tragedy from a distant historical account into a personal, heartfelt experience. Karbala was not just a battlefield where lives were lost. It was a sacred stage where the highest values of humanity were put to the ultimate test. When a mourner engages in Matam, they are not merely remembering events. They are spiritually connecting with the core message that Imam Hussain A.S. carried: the defense of truth, the protection of human dignity, and the rejection of injustice, even at the cost of one's life. This message is not confined to the pages of history. It is meant to live on through the hearts and actions of those who remember it sincerely. Matam serves as a powerful reminder that these values are not abstract ideals but lived realities that require courage and sacrifice. By physically participating in mourning, the believer begins to feel a unique closeness to Imam Hussain A.S., as if they are not just followers of his path, but participants in his mission. This emotional closeness evolves into a spiritual responsibility. A mourner begins to ask themselves, am I embodying the spirit of Karbala in my daily life? Am I standing against falsehood in my community, at work, in my relation? Through Matam, the message of Karbala becomes more than inspiration. It becomes a standard by which the believer judges their own life and actions. Furthermore, this bond created through Matam is not just individual, it is collective. When communities gather and beat their chests together in unison, reciting the names and the agonies of the martyrs, a shared spiritual energy is generated that strengthens communal identity and moral purpose. This spiritual environment helps cultivate a space where the message of Karbala is not only understood intellectually, but absorbed emotionally and morally. People from different walks of life, young and old, rich and poor, all unite under one cause, one banner, the banner of Hussein A.S. The grief becomes a glue that binds hearts together, creating a collective consciousness rooted in sacrifice, resistance, and truth. This deep connection built through Matam ensures that the message of Karbala continues to live, generation after generation. It is not transmitted through mere words, but through heartfelt emotions, tears, and actions that resonate with the spirit of those who gave their lives so that Islam could survive in its purest form. It unites the community in shared grief and faith. One of the most profound aspects of Matam is its ability to bring people together regardless of age, social status, or background, under a single emotional and spiritual umbrella. When people gather to mourn the tragedy of Karbala, they are not just participating in a religious event, they are becoming part of a global family of believers who are bound together by love for Imam Hussain A.S. and his mission. In these gatherings, there is no hierarchy, no competition, and no worldly pride. Everyone is equal in grief, equal in devotion, and equal in the tears they shed. This powerful sense of unity becomes a spiritual force that strengthens the community's identity and its commitment to the values Hussain A.S. stood for. In a world increasingly fragmented by personal interests, political divisions, and material concerns, the mourning of Muharram serves as a countercurrent. It reminds people that they are not alone in their pain, their faith, or their search for truth. When thousands beat their chests together in Matam or cry out Ya Hussein in one voice, they experience a deep sense of brotherhood and sisterhood that transcends individual sorrows. This unity is not superficial, it is rooted in shared values, shared memory, and shared purpose. It builds a community that not only mourns together but also reflects, prays, and strengthens its moral compass together. This communal aspect of Matam also serves as an educational experience for the younger generation. When children witness their elders weeping and performing Matam with sincerity and love, they begin to understand the depth of the sacrifice made in Karbala. It becomes part of their spiritual identity from an early age. The majalis, the processions, the chants, all of it becomes a living tradition, passed from heart to heart and generation to generation. It teaches them that faith is not just a private matter, but something that thrives in unity and collective memory and in shared expression. Moreover, this sense of unity extends beyond local communities. Across the world, from Iraq to India, Pakistan to Lebanon, Iran to Europe, millions participate in Matam, forming a global chain of mourning that spans languages and borders. This global unity is perhaps one of the most remarkable aspects of the Muharram tradition. It shows that the message of Imam Hussain a.s. is universal, and that Matam in all its cultural forms is a unifying thread that weaves the hearts of believers into a single spiritual fabric. Through this unity, the message of Karbala becomes not only remembered, but lived together. Despite criticism, Matam is a powerful ritual of loyalty, not despair. Many people who observe Matam from the outside may misunderstand its true purpose. They may view it as an act of senseless self-harm or emotional extremism, failing to grasp the deep layers of devotion, meaning, and symbolism that exist within it. But for the mourner who understands the tragedy of Karbala, Matam is not about helplessness or weakness. It is about strength, commitment, and unshakable loyalty to a divine cause. It is the body's way of expressing what the heart cannot say in words: the pain of losing the purest souls in Islam, and the burning grief of witnessing the injustice faced by Imam Hussain a.s. and his family. Matam is an act that reaffirms one's allegiance to Hussein ibn Ali a.s. and his eternal stand against tyranny. It is a public declaration that the mourners will not allow the sacrifice of Karbala to be forgotten or dismissed. Every strike to the chest echoes the statement, "La Bayt ya Hussein," "We are with you, O Hussein." Far from being an expression of hopelessness, it is a sign of awakening. It stirs the soul to remain vigilant, to be morally alert, and to stand up for justice in every era. Through Matam, believers say that they are ready to carry forward the mission of Hussein in their own lives, whether through social action, spiritual development, or resistance against oppression. Criticism often arises from a lack of understanding of the spiritual depth and historical context behind the practice. What appears to be physical mourning is actually a form of spiritual discipline. It is a channel through which the love of Ahlul Bayt a.s. finds expression and solidifies in the believer's identity. People who perform Matam do not see it as a burden or a strange cultural act. They see it as an honor, a privilege, a sacred trust that connects them directly to the suffering of the Prophet's family. This act, though often loud and intense, is fueled not by chaos, but by organized, purposeful, and heartfelt devotion. It also stands as a rejection of apathy. In a world where injustices happen every day, and many turn a blind eye, the mourners of Hussein a.s. refuse to be silent. They beat their chests not only to remember the past, but to protest the continuation of injustice in the present. Through this physical act, they express loyalty not only to the individuals of Karbala, but to the eternal values those individuals lived and died for: truth, justice, honor, and unwavering faith in God. Matam becomes a lifelong pledge that the mourner will remain loyal to these values, no matter how difficult the path may be. Matam keeps the legacy of Imam Hussain alive in our hearts and action. The event of Karbala is not meant to be confined to the pages of history books, or remembered only as a past tragedy. It is meant to live, breathe, and shape the conscience of every believer. Through Matam, this legacy transforms from a historical event into a personal commitment. Every beat of the chest, every tear shed, and every lament recited serves as a powerful reminder that the sacrifice of Imam Hussain as must not be forgotten. It must be remembered not only with the mind, but with the heart, soul, and body. Matam ensures that this remembrance is not passive. It becomes active, emotional, and deeply rooted in the mourner's being. The legacy of Karbala is one of courage, justice, truth, and unwavering faith in the face of overwhelming adversity. By performing Matam, we keep these principles alive and relevant in our lives. It is not simply an emotional outlet, but a declaration that we continue to carry the message of Hussain as in our daily choices, our treatment of others, and our resistance to oppression and falsehood. The spirit of Karbala is reignited each year through Matam, breathing new life into our spiritual identity and reminding us of our responsibilities as followers of the Ahlul Bayt. This act of mourning also serves as a bridge between generations. Through Matam, young people learn not only about the tragedy of Karbala, but about the values it represents. It becomes a form of spiritual storytelling where the past is made present, and the heroes of Islam are not distant figures but living inspiration. The rhythm of Matam, the poetry of the Marsiyas, and the chants of mourning embed the story of Imam Hussain into the emotional memory of the community. This emotional connection is powerful. It ensures that even as the world changes, the message of Karbala remains close, relevant, and active in the hearts of the people. Moreover, Matam serves as a shield against forgetfulness. In a time when distractions and materialism can easily lead one away from spiritual purpose, the mourning rituals of Muharram, especially Matam, act as an anchor. They bring the community back to its core, back to the remembrance of sacrifice, of the divine struggle between right and wrong, and of the ultimate example of selflessness set by Imam Hussain. The legacy of Karbala is too sacred to be remembered only intellectually. It must be felt, lived, and passed on with passion. Matam is one of the most powerful tools through which that transmission occurs, turning the message of Karbala into a lived reality that continues to inspire, guide, and awaken the souls of believers everywhere. In conclusion, Matam is far more than an emotional ritual. It is a profound spiritual journey that connects us to the timeless message of Karbala. It teaches us loyalty, awakens our conscience, unites our communities, and keeps the values of truth, justice, and sacrifice alive in our hearts. Through every beat of the chest and every tear that falls, we renew our allegiance to Imam Hussain and remind the world that his mission did not end in Karbala. It lives on in us. May we continue to honor his legacy not just in mourning, but in our actions, our choices, and our unwavering stand for what is right.